Okay, roll away.
It's rolling.
Senator Simon, we have a big deficit. Nobody seems to know how to handle it. Would you raise taxes to take care of the deficit?
I know as much about the deficit as anyone in this panel. I've been on the Budget Committee in the House and the Senate. But let me tell you, you can't tinker with taxes and solve it. The best way, the only way to really solve the deficit problem is to put America back to work, to move on, and for each 1% you get, for every 1% you get the, let me start over on that one.
Start them over. Is it back on?
What?
The light's on?
Yeah, we have a
Yeah.
a tremendous problem of deficits. Nobody seems to be able to do anything about it. My question, Senator Simon, is would you raise taxes in order to deal with the deficit?
I understand the deficit as well as anyone in this panel. I serve in the Budget Committee in the House. I'm on the Budget Committee in the Senate. You cannot solve the deficit problem with tinkering with taxes. You have to put America back to work. Every 1% you reduce the deficit, every 1% you reduce unemployment, you reduce the deficit $30 billion. Employ America and you're going to solve the deficit problem. I would add, you're not going to do anything but aggravate the problem by having the kind of tax change was voted last year. And I am the only member of this panel who served in Congress who voted against the tax bill that passed last year that will, in fact, increase the taxes of 1/3 of middle-income Americans.
Okay, two quick observations.
Pardon?
I was going to say, in response, you never once looked at the camera with Mike.
Yeah. Good point, Al.
Two things. I think you ought to say no right out of the box. If you're not going to raise taxes for the deficits, then you ought to say so right up front. I'm not sure, I don't know when or if you go into the business that you know more than the rest, but I think you ought to say no right up front. And when you get to the last year's tax bill, I think you ought to stress that you had the courage to stand up even though it was tremendously popular. And is the best reason you voted against it is that it raises taxes on the middle class, or that it allows wealthy people to avoid their fair share of taxes? I think the latter is politically much stronger, although there's no reason you couldn't put both in. But it does two things. It raises the taxes on 1/3 of middle-income America, and it allows wealthy people not to pay their share of taxes.
And reduces the tax on the wealthiest of Americans from 50% to 28%.
It's probably better to use the word opposed than voted against, so we won't raise the issue of the final vote.
And rich Americans. Also,
Yeah. Well, I think I should say voted against,
Okay, so
because on the final passage of the bill, I did vote against it.
No,
I wasn't there. Oh, no.
On the bill-
On final
on the bill
passage of
is-
the bill, I voted against it. Conference, I was not there for the conference report.
No, other way around.
No.
You're
Believe me.
correct. You're correct on that, but I would say, if somebody said, did you vote for the tax reform bill? The tax reform bill was not what you voted on. The tax reform bill that was enacted.
I think you're
I voted against.
on really strong ground. He says I voted against the tax bill.
That's fine.
You can add when it came to the Senate, if you want.
Absolutely.
The language I would have suggested on that tax bill is to close so many tax loopholes and devote none of that extra revenue towards the #1 problem in this country, the deficit, was wrong.
I don't like giving away the notion that you close loopholes. Maybe you do, but the fundamental loophole is that wealthy people in this country don't pay their
That
taxes.
was just you missed a golden opportunity in tax reform.
In other words, if you're gonna-
But you see, he's saying that tinkering with taxes doesn't solve the deficit problem. You don't want to then go back and say you didn't use the loophole money.
If you're justifying your vote against the tax bill and you're demonstrating it as a position of leadership, you would not do two things. You would never call it the tax reform bill.
Right.
Drop the word reform, and you would never say a tax bill that closed loopholes, because everybody ought to be for a tax bill that
Yeah.
closes loopholes.
Right.
Those are two no-nos. Roll the tape.
It's rolling.
Senator Simon, we quarantine for lots of, not stress that. AIDS represents an enormous problem for this country and a growing one. would you favor quarantining AIDS victims to keep from spreading the disease to others?
That is not a realistic answer. It is not a desirable answer. We do have serious problems on AIDS. And the answer is education, the answer is research, the answer is funding for test centers. It is moving in a whole series of ways that we can move, and we ought to be moving, and I'm pleased to say I've been part of leadership on moving on those issues.
You have favored a balanced budget amendment. Most people think that that would be ineffective. How would you, if you were President of the United States, balance the budget?
First, as President of the United States, I would not wait for a balanced budget amendment. I would move. In the first 60 days I'm in office, I'm going to make clear that we're going to get our economy going, that we are going to put people to work, and in the process of lowering the unemployment rate, we reduce the deficit and you move toward that balanced budget. But let no one have any question about this whatsoever. Under assignment administration, we're going to move to put people to work, we're going to close that deficit, and we're going to lower interest rates.
I think on that question where it's straight away on balancing the budget, that's the place to use the $30 billion for each 1%. I think I'd always come back to that because people generally fuzzily know that people, if you put them back to work, they'll pay a little more taxes. But I think when you say reducing our unemployment by half would reduce our budget deficit by $150 billion, you can make that a flat-out assertion. If a news guy says, how do you arrive at that? You can say, usable figures, everybody using $30 billion per percentage point. You could shorten the answer if you're under a stress of time by saying, if we cut our present unemployment in half, we would reduce our deficit by $150 billion.
No, I think you can say you can do better than that. Say if you cut unemployment in half, you eliminate the deficit. That in fact is what you do.
That's even better.
Yeah.
And I'm going to cut it in half.
Yeah, you can't smile when they ask, I saw you signaling, but when they ask a question about AIDS.
Okay, roll.
Yeah.
All right, are we rolling? Are we rolling? Next question.
You can't smile on solutions.
The next question.
Not debating, but others do smile on solutions.
All right. The next question, and we'll roll back, and then everybody can evaluate this, okay? Senator Simon, you're big on arms control. Talk about it all the time. Do you really think you can trust the Russians on arms control?
The question is not of trusting the Russians. The question is, can we get verifiable arms control agreements? And the answer to that is yes. We have great technical knowledge in the area of verification. And for example, we could stop all testing of nuclear warheads. We can verify it. But the question of trust also has to be tackled. We have to build up some trust between our countries. And that is why I have been the leader in Congress on exchanges with the Soviets, with other countries, so that we have more young people who understand each other, so we have future leaders who understand each other. Arms control agreements in isolation are not going to stand. Built on a basis of greater trust between nations, they can be reinforced and can stand.
Senator, all across Middle America, the farms are in trouble and farmers are in trouble. What would be your farm policy if you, by some means, got into the White House?
What I will do is to, first of all, restructure the farm program so that it is family farm oriented. We really don't need $20 million subsidies to California farms and that sort of thing. Second, we ought to be pushing research. Just the present use of ethanol, 7% of the gasoline is now 10% ethanol. That has raised the price of corn about 11 cents a bushel. Much greater research would be of substantial help into the agricultural situation. And then finally, we can use our food in the Food for Peace program much more than we are to help other nations. That helps, and it also helps farmers in Iowa, Illinois, and everywhere else.
Just quickly, I would use my bill twice. My bill.
Peace tax is what you're talking about.
Okay, go ahead.
Senator Simon, it is alleged that you support this cockamamie idea of a peace tax fund. Would you explain your position on that?
Yes, when I was a member of the House, I at a point when we had Pentagon spending that was going through the roof and no sense of responsibility at all. I joined Senator Mark Hatfield, a Republican from Oregon, and others in sponsoring a piece of legislation that in effect was a protest to the on their wild spending habits.
Well, aren't you really just one of those Democrats, and there are many of them, who actually at bottom just are soft on defense?
I served overseas in the Army. I'm proud to have served overseas in the Army. I believe in a strong, tough, lean defense. But I don't believe that just a collection of weapons is defense. I don't believe that we should ignore the advice of people like General Rogers, our NATO commander, who says we can save money sensibly by not putting so many eggs in the nuclear missile basket.
Try leaning forward a little bit.
That's because this morning General Rogers said he's really hesitant about this agreement they plan to go to. So when you're invoking Rogers,
Okay, you want to back up and
Yeah, this is one that is a little more complicated than, unfortunately, because you do have to maintain that oil supply for the rest of the world. Otherwise, we're going to be hurt too.
I think that this is stronger speaks to the answer, and I would argue, John, that the strength of that answer is in the animosity of the American people toward countries who use 10 times, 20 times as much of that oil as we do, and who will contribute nothing to the protection.
Yeah.
Well,
Politically, I don't know if realistically.
but realistically, that's not true, because they are, as Steve Solis pointed out this morning, they are not escorting, it would be essentially us asking our allies to help us escort American ships. They are escorting their own ships. So if you're asking for an allied multilateral fleet to protect all shipping in the Gulf, that's one thing, but that's not really what's going on here. But personally, I think on the Kuwait question, if they are mining, the follow-up is, well, in light of the news reports that they're mining the Kuwaiti oil terminal, what would you do then? I would say, if asked by the government of Kuwait, I would send in a minesweeping team.
With our allies, though, I think
With
that
our
what
allies.
you added is just, you know.
Yeah.
Yes, I'm sorry.
Is this also the time to get a gig in it, that what is here is the result of the Iran Contra? If we had sold arms to Iran,
Yeah, I think
it's
the
another
whole,
part.
the folly of selling arms to Iran is a good thing. I think the other point that Jim mentioned, each of these, we ought to say, foreign policy, we defense policy, and not the other way around.
Okay, sure, I guess.
Back to AIDS. In managing the AIDS crisis, which to you is more important, the right of the individual or the right of the public to be protected from this
I need
disease?
some paper, somebody, excuse me, for Jerry. Yes, go ahead.
In managing the AIDS crisis, which is more important, the right of the individual or the right of the public to be protected from the disease?
As in many of these areas, we have to balance these things. But we can move on this problem and move decisively at the same time that we protect civil liberties in this area. We can move on research. We can move on education. We can move in funding for voluntary centers. We can protect civil liberties in this country and move on AIDS.
Good, 28 seconds. Okay, Deborah Levy, why don't you ask your best to get your question?
Okay, millions of people in this country have been victims of crime, and the rest of us live in fear of becoming victims. You're chairman of the Constitution Subcommittee. How do you stand on proposals calling for the death penalty, reform of the exclusionary rule, or habeas corpus, which let criminals off on a technicality?
When you talk about letting criminals off in a technicality, what you have to remember is that we are protecting the basic liberties of all Americans. I'm for a vigorous pursuit of crime, but I'm also for a vigorous defense of civil liberties in this nation.
Can you reverse those two sentences? So first, you start out saying I'm for a vigorous
Pursuit of crime.
We have to be tough on crime, but we also
So we have to be tough in protecting civil liberties.
Yeah. But I would then move into that these proposals won't solve the problem. People who commit crime share two basic characteristics, lack of a job and lack of hope, and then you go into your,
Yeah. And but we were, yeah. But I think we can say.
I agree with it. It's a great issue to think about.
But I do think, yeah, I think you can say, if you really want to be tough on crime, then let's start giving people jobs. Then let's start teaching people how to read and write.
Right.
Let's start
Right.
moving
Yeah,
on programs.
education
this
stuff
end.
is very, very powerful in that.
I would also not, your answer a little bit defines civil liberties as letting people off on technicalities. And it seems to me you don't want to be in the position of saying
Yeah, that's
that.
right.
I mean, I would transcend the technicality issue. You know, of course I want people who are convicted of crimes to go to jail. I think we can do that with civil liberties and we protect people's rights without defending letting people off on technicalities.
If you're, can I just do one follow-up?
Sure,
If you're, the follow-up could be, well, you're the chairman of the subcommittee, you're going to hold hearings on these things?
Not as long as I'm a president.
I think the answer to that is that they've been the subject of numerous hearings over the past several years and they've never passed Congress for a very good reason. They won't work.
Yeah. Now, the one thing that I obviously did evade here is the death penalty.
I forgot about it.
And frankly, my position is if I'm pressed, I'll give it. But it is not a popular position. So that I think if I can evade it as long as possible, I should.
You stated in 20 seconds?
You mean that I want to evade
What
the
is your
thing? I am very much, I basically oppose the death penalty. It is a penalty that we impose on children of the poor. I want to be tough as be on those who are convicted of crimes, but there is no evidence that the death penalty has reduced crime rate at all.
What I'd be inclined to do if you do have to answer the death penalty issue is define it in terms of its unpopularity. I think you have to say, I realize it's an unpopular position, but you got to take a popular stand. And
Yeah.
That's a good point.
That is a
You
good-
gain
yeah.
more.
Yeah, yeah.
I would
Yeah.
define it.
Yeah.
That's a great point.
Great time. Okey doke, campaign financing, Ray Johnson.
Senator, since you are such a strong advocate of public financing of elections, why do you accept PAC funds?
I have to use the system that exists. There are a lot of things I don't like, but I use the system that exists. But I'm clear in being opposed to the present system of financing campaigns. I favor public financing campaigns where you have a voluntary checkoff and where you do not have special interest groups dominating political candidates.
Good. May I give him a quick follow-up on it? Since you're concerned about the budget, why do you want to use public financing to pay the senators to candidate?
We're talking about a voluntary checkoff for public financing, and you're talking about something that is not 1/100th of 1% of the budget. It's probably not 1/1000th of 1%.
It's really a non-budget item.
Well, it's not a non-budget.
No, it's not. It is a budget item, no?
It'd be
It's a budget
revenues if
item.
you didn't take it
Yeah.
out.
You could apply it to deficit reduction.
And if nobody checked off, it's a voluntary action, there would be no money to divide, that would be it. Unless you actually got into the appropriation process. It's not-
Figure out, Ray, what percentage of it is. If it's, 1/1000th or whatever.
Yeah, the
Okay.
current proposal is about 25 million a year. So
Okay. Well, you figure out what 25 million is.
I think the point you made in Nashville yesterday was very good, that this would lower the total spending on campaigns which have gotten out of hand. Both candidates would be restricted to the same amount.
Yeah.
There'd be plenty of money to run an even campaign.
Yeah.
Are there any
Yeah, that is
presidential
another
candidates who are not accepting PAC money?
Yep, the caucus.
Yeah.
You don't want to make a political choice here, Paul. You probably don't want to do this, but just toss it out for your consideration. In presidential campaigns, PAC monies represented, on the Democratic side, represented extraordinarily small percentages of the total.
About 2%.
2% or less. Second, a number of these people are beating their chests saying they don't accept PAC money. accepted PAC money in huge amounts prior to becoming an official candidate and used that in very questionable ways.
Such
I think-
You're shaking your ground.
No, just leave it hang out there. I can tell you the questionable ways.
Well, but does it apply to all of the people?
Bruce Babbitt raises umpteen thousands of dollars, hires staff to go into Iowa and New Hampshire. Is that an accident? No. Hires that, and then has his people out there beating their chest saying, we don't accept PAC money. You know, it is the height of hypocrisy. I think there are a couple of candidates that fall in that category, but Babbitt certainly falls square in that category. You may not want to raise this, but it's there.
They're playing the rules, though, I think.
Floyd, if you say that PAC money is only 2%, isn't the obvious comeback, then why not just not accept PAC money if this is the system you want to go towards?
Yeah, it would be
2%.
kind of a pious inconsistency for me to do so after I had accepted PAC money in past campaigns.
Good answer.
That's a good answer.
Yeah.
Okay. This one courtesy of Tim Tilley, who is not here. Seniors, big constituency. Senator, you say you're supportive of seniors, yet you voted to tax Social Security benefits. How do you explain this action?
I voted for the compromise that was worked out by a committee, a bipartisan committee, to protect Social Security retirement. The retirement system was in jeopardy. Congressman Claude Pepper headed a committee to protect Social Security, and this was part of that package. I did not agree with everything in that package.
I put Claude Pepper's name at the front of that.
Yeah.
And the middle and the end.
My friend Claude. But that's a good, by the way, that's a good answer where as soon as you've got that 15-second beginning on it, and no one in this campaign is more committed and more dedicated to protecting the economic security of our parents and grandparents and fighting for working families and
Yeah.
I mean, that's the perfect offering.
And long-term health care.
And long-term health care and all of that stuff, and that's what this
Yeah.
campaign is about.
Okay. A few more. South Africa. Senator, what approach do you favor to South Africa? Comprehensive sanctions, a total trade ban, disinvestment, and haven't the South African elections recently shown that sanctions don't work?
The South African elections don't show anything of the kind. The reality is we are headed toward unbelievable violence. And for the United States to be indifferent is an invitation to that violence. There is only one way of changing the scene there, and that is put economic pressure on South Africa, and that has to be from the American business community to the South African business community. And so, yes, I favor sanctions. I favor peaceful means of bringing about a peaceful settlement in South Africa to move away from apartheid.
Do you want to mention being chairman of the South Africa, the African Affairs Supplement?
I could. I think that is a mixed bag. And let me tell you what, Jesse is now telling some people I'm the only candidate for president who has visited South Africa. And unfortunately, we were scheduled to go, but because of the election. Pardon?
Who has or
Who has?
You haven't.
No, it's
I have not.
Jesse saying he is.
He's saying he is. And then for me to say, and then for me to say, well, I chair the African subcommittee, and somebody will say, well, if you're chairman of the African subcommittee, how come you haven't been to South Africa?
Well, he's saying, Jackson is twice, at least that we know of, has said he's the only presidential candidate who has been to Africa.
Yeah.
Now there you've got to vote.
Yeah, there.
Yeah, but,
I don't think that means anything to 90% of the people who might be listening to this, the fact that he's the chairman of the subcommittee. And it is an uneven, when the agenda, an uneven response. But then somebody's going to say, well, why haven't you had a hearing?
yeah, we haven't done it.
So I would leave that.
Don't you think you should mention you divested your interest, or would you rather not?
I think I better not get into that.
So I think the logical Buckley question is, sanctions clearly are not working. The tension and the repression and the violence has increased. What is your position on that?
There's a Robert Kennedy quote, something about those who stand in the way of, those who stand in the way of peaceful change make violent revolution inevitable. If it ever business.
And the other part of the answer here is, if this administration had gone along with UN sanctions, then we might be seeing change there. What you have to do is to get the business community in South Africa to understand that change has to come. When the business community in South Africa recognizes this, then change is going to come in South Africa.
Well, and you can say, evidently they are, like Ford's going on now, like GM.
Yeah, but it's...
Also,
I wouldn't have time for this.
I don't think on the South African question, particularly, you need to get into the efficacy of a particular policy, regardless of what the question is. You got to be on the side of change. We got to be on the side of change. Change is coming.
Yeah.
Peaceful rather than violent.
Yeah, goodbye.
Yeah.
Next question.
All right, let's do one more and whatever follow-up, and then we'll kind of take a 15-minute break, and we'll do the full thing.
Make it a 5-minute break.
5
We need
minutes.
to.
Yeah.
Well, we really need a trade and a farm question.
Trade questions next.
Okay.
Okay, and we'll do that. Senator, you were an original co-sponsor of S. 499, the Senate equivalent of the Gephardt Amendment, which has been labeled the most protectionist legislation since Smoot-Hawley. Why are you supporting this simplistic piece of legislation? That's a lovely question.
Yes. It is not simplistic, but it is not a substitute for a President of the United States who is going to move on trade, who understands the complexity of it, who's going to pull this thing together. We now have 18 different agencies in the federal government that handle trade. We need a President of the United States who pulls this together, has a trade czar who is tough, who moves on this problem, who encourages American businesses to export, who will tell our friends in other countries that unfair trade practices against this country are no longer going to be tolerated.
I suggest adding one other thought there, and that is getting back some of those, whatever the numbers are, 1 million jobs, 2 million jobs we've exported to Japan. I think the trade issue, as far as a sizable piece of your constituency you're trying to fill, is the job issue.
Yeah, this issue is stealing American jobs, American working people's jobs, and you know, we've got to get tough, and we have to just sort of blend that, the whole jobs protection, jobs right here in the U.S. We got to stop exporting jobs, we got to start exporting our goods.
The other thing I would suggest in trading, my impression is, and those who study this more than I do may correct me, is that Dukakis is looking to go the free trade side. He's looking, and is Biden.
And it's Gore.
I'm less concerned about Biden and Gore than I am about Dukakis. And I think you got to keep in the back of your mind the opportunity to get into a back and forth with Dukakis on trade. Because it's an issue on which he will be a foil. And in terms of your position and the base that we're going after, it provides an opportunity to set you off from Dukakis, which is one of the, I think that's one of the goals of this debate. So I would look for an opportunity on trade to engage in it.
Yeah, I think we have to be careful on that one, though. I
agree.
We have been able to finesse this thing pretty well up to this point. And it is one where we don't want to end up with a raft of editorials criticizing us.
I'm going to make a follow-up point to that. Paul, of course, you'll have the book, and there's a lot in there on these topics, but as regards to Dukakis and trade, he's played the typical governor's game. He's made a lot of trade missions. I mean, his last one was to Israel. He signed agreements on all kinds of things. His trade stuff, again, was very positive. We even looked at the textile industry, which, of course, is big in Massachusetts, and all the problems there, whether that would be a soft spot. And the unions and the textile industry are all in agreement that Governor Dukakis is wonderful. It's a federal problem with textile mills, and he didn't have anything to do with it. So he's very,
Also,
he's got his bases covered in that area.
Also, you've got 45 seconds. You've got time. I thought you were very effective in Nashville when you segued into the bilingual education. The fact that among the other things that we've got to do is we're playing in a game where we're not supposed to play, and this is a strength.
And hit the education side.
Yeah. Right. I don't know much about the trade thing, but for some of the messages we should send, I think places like Iowa is on the selling side of the trade questions. You need to, when we talk about the buying side and the on the selling side.
Can you? Is there any way you can slip in Paul, the project you guys did, I don't completely understand it, but to get exports going, you initiated a project where people have been calling our office all the time. To Korea. Can you anywhere say, as part of this year, as part of my Senate, I don't know.
Well, and you might want to try this, and the point of saying, we not only have to deal with these partners, we have to work on selling our goods to them as well. And certainly my office, I've worked on such a project now, and I'm happy to say that we're working with a number of companies that are having some success selling to the Koreans, who have recently had a very big problem with us because they've got such big surplus.
Which goes to Dukakis, who's running again and again on, you don't have to listen to what I'm going to do, you can just look at what I've done. And you need to have something like that.
Yeah.
Because his response when I've been to is, after I gave him your record, they said, oh, so he's never run anything. And so we run it.
I thought the trade answer was good. Jay, agriculture, and then question on engineering.
There may be general agreement, Senator, among candidates that we need to take measures to save the farm credit system. But estimates are that it may take $5, $10, or even $15 billion to do that above the $26 billion we've already been spending on farm programs. Where will you get that money?
We have to save the farm credit system, and we can work out a system of saving the farm credit system, getting lower interest to farmers in the same way we did it for Lockheed, for New York City, for Chrysler. And where you take the actual cost and you add a small percentage to that, so that there is no risk to the United States government, so we help farmers like we're not helping them today, frankly.
I got a lot of problems with that answer. I think it's too technical, and I think you got a mixed bag when you run down that list. I think you run into the bailout side of those issues. I'd be much more inclined to go with, you got to set priorities in terms of what we're going to do. Saving the family farm is one of my priorities. I'll make it a priority to do what we have to do in making these budget judgments to do what we have to do to protect family farmers and therefore save the farm credit system, rather than getting into the technical, how do you refinance loans? It's an opportunity to be strong for farmers, and that's what
I think we have to say the farm credit system needs to be rescued, and we got to get more. And I don't know how we get it, but
No, I disagree. I don't think you say the farm credit system has to be rescued. I think you say family farmers have to be rescued. Because nobody cares about government programs.
Exactly.
They're the invisible part.
Exactly.
Farmers will care about that. They are very sensitive to saving the farm credit system.
Right.
And saving family farms is a totally different issue from saving the farm credit system. The best thing you said in your answer was that whatever things we do has to help the borrowers. Right. Because their big concern is we'll save the farm credit system, right. Farmers will still take a beating. The ways to
not the borrowers, the borrowers who are farmers, or the farmers.
The only borrowers in the farm credit system are farmers.
Yeah, but
the average public doesn't know that.
Oh, yeah.
They may think it's large corporations that are agri-corporations.
Farmers who have borrowed.
The ways to get around that dollar question, there aren't many ways to do it. It's going to take some money. But instead of an infusion of cash, we can talk about lines of credit, loan guarantees. There are proposals for a secondary market for farm loans that will bring non-federal cash into that pool, that are all things we should consider in a program that will benefit the farmer borrowers in the system, as well as savings banks.
It seems to be the question that is raised by his question is, does giving that litany, which makes it a priority, it says that Congress and this president will care about it, is giving that litany a bad signal or too technical? Because I think a lot of people will remember we saved Chrysler, we saved New York City, and maybe maybe you don't want to say that.
My only point is, the polling I'm familiar with makes those somewhat mixed depending on your constituency. Saving New York is not popular everywhere in the United States, and saving Chrysler is not popular with everyone. So getting into a whole raft of what is very popular everywhere is saving family farmers.
Well, what about combining it this way, saying we can't say that we're willing to save New York and save Chrysler and not save the family farm. We have to save the family farm. And your point's
I'd leave them out, but that's a hell of a lot better.
The question again isn't saving the family farm, it's a
Okay.
credit system.
Credit system.
We'll ask another question about saving the family farm.
I think though, I would try to link the two
Jay,
because.
The point that Jim is trying to make here is, yes, the question is on the farm credit system, of which 2% of your audience understands.
Yeah.
But the answer is something that's much broader, and you put that up front because you have to save the, we have to act on this to save the family farm, and then you go into whatever else.
That's
you
why
do.
we'll save the credit system.
Yes, and I think Deborah is correct here now when we say, if we, or we can say, we save Chrysler without cost to the federal government. We save Lockheed without cost to the federal government. And we can save the family farm without risk. We can get farms to family farmers without great risk.
I would add one line in there that farmers have to be involved in the policy, because I think that some of the farmers think that they don't have any input into these federal programs, whether it's the farm credit system or others. If you could close by saying, and you know what, we really think the farmer ought to have a say in how these programs are worked on. If it's only 45 seconds, that kind of signals to the farmer that here's a friend of the farmer.
And one other thing that is on that same line is if you also say one of the solutions is getting farm income up so that farmers can pay off their own debts rather than the taxpayer having to save the system, then you've solved a lot of those problems.
In fact, I think that's the opening line right there, Jay.
Yeah.
I agree with
You
that.
just start out, you say, well, the real problem here that has to be addressed is
Is
farm
the
income up
prices.
to the big loan.
Right.
Yeah.
That's where we're going.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would suggest on this New York Chrysler thing though, is that I don't think people believe that the federal government didn't spend money to save Chrysler. I don't think they believe the federal government didn't spend money to save Lockheed. And therefore the formulation which says, if we did this, if we could do that, damn it, we're going to do it for farmers.
That sounds like something.
I think is a much safer, more believable position.
But Paul, when you said prices and Jay had said income, I think that if you say prices, you're alienating consumers. If you say farmer income and not say prices, then you fudge that.
Okay, one more question, and we'll take a break.
You consistently voted for measures that would establish an oil import fee to shore up domestic oil prices. While that may sound good in Houston and oil-producing states around our country, it could be devastating to the industrial states in the Midwest and to homeowners in New England who are reliant on oil for heat. Why do you support such proposals?
Under the Reagan administration's economic policies, there was no question that we had to establish additional revenue. There is also no question we have to establish greater independence from the Middle East, encourage conservation, and encourage other energy research programs. This is all part of it, and that will help every area of the country.
Don't you also favor though protection?
I love it.
Homeowners?
Absolutely. I have no recollection of what the question was or what the relationship was to the answer to the question. Seriously, it's great.
Are you going around, are you on the stump saying you're for an oil import fee?
No. I answer the question when it's tossed at me.
Are you on, he's on record favoring it?
Yeah, yeah.
It is a bad policy. It doesn't promote conservation. It is a drain America first policy. I mean, somebody's going to say this to you in rebuttal.
Yeah, of course I differed with that, but the other thing is that just about every other candidate is on record for it also.
Right, so you want to propose.
You're right on it.
Horrible.
You said it was on
It's the absolute worst policy you could be for on that one. I really, and you know, I'll go with you on the comment on that one.
Well, Tom, you'll have to take that up with another court.
I know.